So just to bring, so on the screen today, we've got Dr. Buddy Funk. How does that sound, Dr. Funk?
I like it still.
Brings a smile to your face. And Brother Dave Bowden is pastor in Stone County, in Tri-County Baptist Association. He's listening in. Dave, what just to kind of bring you up to speed, I've been working with Buddy as part of his dissertation committee at Midwestern Seminary. And he's a newly minted doctor and passed his orals last week. And I asked him if he'd be gracious enough to sit down with me and just let me ask him some questions about what he learned through the process of his dissertation. It's been a real long road for him. Buddy, you working on that thing for a number of years and finally crossed the finish line. So thankful for that. But Buddy agreed to do that. I really appreciate his willingness to sit down and just talk about his experience in ministry. So Dave, that's kind of the background of this. You feel free at any time. If you've got any questions, something you just want to ask, something's not clear, feel free to do that and just jump in at any time, okay?
Okay.
Okie doke. So, hey, Buddy, why don't you about your background, where you're from originally, where you've served in ministry, maybe if you've worked in secular work before, just something about your background and about your family too.
Yeah. So I'm Buddy Funk, pastor at Fellowship Baptist Church for another week anyway. Been in ministry. I was in youth ministry when I was in college. So over 20 years in ministry, serving as associate pastor, youth pastor, served here at Fellowship for the last 15 years. I have a wife, have 3 children. My oldest son, Jarvis, plays football and goes to Southwest Baptist. Have a middle son. He's Carson. Jarvis is the oldest. And then Carson is our middle child. He's at Missouri State and he's leading worship at Spring Hill under Jared Proctor. And then I have a daughter that just started college this year here at Crowder in Neosho. And that's where we are located here in Neosho. My wife is a middle school teacher. We began to pray when I was in youth ministry and felt God call us to pastor ministry, just began to pray that Lord would send us somewhere where our kids would graduate. And the Lord has been faithful in doing that. So pretty excited about that and looking at joining Samaritan's Purse February the 8th, going to be moving over to Haiti to live there for however long the Lord calls us to be there. So
you guys are
pastors.
You guys are in transition right now.
Yes.
You packing up boxes, or how does that work with Samaritan's Purse?
We're packing up very few boxes and throwing a lot of stuff out because we're trying to just liquidate everything that we have. So
you have yard sales, or are you just putting it out on the front yard and telling people to come by and get it?
That I'm about at the point where just come by and get it. Come in the house and grab it. It's what I really want to tell them. But
I'd love to explore that Samaritan's Purse angle with you right now, but I don't want to take more of your time, but we'll be praying for you guys as you transition out. And I'd like to explore with you what the experience was when you told the folks in the church, because that's always really interesting. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Tell me something about your experience of pastoring at Fellowship. Would you say it's been an easy road? Has it been a good experience? Have been ups and downs? What's it been like for you there?
I'm going to say, like, just overall, it's been a beautiful journey. I have loved pastoring the people at Fellowship Baptist. People have asked me before, are you leaving us? Are you going to go somewhere else? And I said, I have no desire to pastor any other church than Fellowship Baptist Church. I love our people. I feel like they love me. For a while, my big joke was nobody else will have me. They're not too nice to get rid of me. So that was kind of my saying for years. So I found somebody to take me, I guess. And so just I've had just been a fun time. Now there's been their ups and downs, leadership challenges, We've had people leave the church because they didn't follow the same vision. But overall, I just feel like the Lord, one thing I can say is the Lord fought our battles, when we came to leadership battles.
That's a great word. That's a good word. Talk to me about your experience of burnout in ministry there at Fellowship. So you've had a good run. You've been there for, a decade and a half. But as you shared in your dissertation, you had experienced burnout in ministry. Talk about that and at what point in your pastorate there at Fellowship did you start feeling that? What was going on in the ministry in your life at that time and what it felt like?
Yeah. So I didn't really know what was wrong. I just could tell something wasn't right. And it's been real interesting since I have resigned from pastoring. Even my own kids have said, Dad, I'm glad that you're doing something different. Your passion hasn't been there. And it's really surprised me to hear them say that. But I recognized something wasn't right about 3 or 4 years ago. And I spent a lot of time talking to people that mentored me, people that cared about me. And the theme was like, buddy, you're burnt out. You're tired. You're exhausted. And I ended up reading Wayne Cadora's book, Leading on Empty. That was one of the things that segued into understanding burnout. But then I actually read Kerry Neuenwolf's. I read his article on what burnout was. And it was when I read that article where I was like, oh, I'm burnt out. And I think if somebody would have come in and asked me, are you burnt out in ministry? I'd have said, no, I'm fine. I'm kind of tired, but hey, we can make it. And so some of the feelings that helped me realize that I had burnout, specifically, I can remember one Sunday getting up, and I love to preach. I love to teach. And one Sunday I looked at my wife and said, I just don't feel like preaching today. And that was the first time I felt that. And I can't even say that was a consistent feeling, but just that came across my mind. Another thing was just everything began to take a little bit longer to do. Just staying focused on the task. That was one of the things that I knew, man, why is it taking so much longer? It's just hard to focus for me. Another sign to me is my ministry is really based on people. And I can remember one week just having several people come into my office, and I can remember being like, what next? Just like, oh, here, what's going to happen here? Or just like, man, I've got so much to do. And that's just not my personality. So I knew that people were draining me. And usually that's what lifts me up. I'm an extrovert, so being around people is what's supposed to build me up. But it wasn't doing that well. I think another sign is self-medicating. And for me, self-medicating is eating. And so, I've gained quite a bit of weight over the last 2 or 3 years. And during that time, and I think that's probably a comfort thing, that self-medicating. So those are just some of the things that helped me realize that possibly was burnout was what I was experiencing.
Did you have a sense in your heart that that you did not love the pastorate, did not love the church as much as you did before? Was that part of it?
When I sat down and was real honest, I would say that I still love the church. I still love pastoring. But there was it was difficult. It was work. I would say the first 10 or 12 years in ministry, it wasn't work. I looked forward to it. I enjoyed leading. I enjoyed visioning. I enjoyed the newness, that kind of stuff. And so it wasn't that I didn't love the people and I didn't love the church, but the work was hard.
Okay.
Another telling sign to me was that I loved the church and I loved the people, but I found myself looking at like other ministry opportunities out there, like going on Midwestern's webpage of ministry positions. Whenever the state paper would come out, looking at that, seeing what else was out there as an option if something interested me or whatever. And that, like I almost 1 foot out the door, but knowing that this is a great spot of ministry.
So I always think, my wife has got a whole lot better radar in ministry things than I do. And I learned the hard way that I need to pay more attention to her than I do that little voice in my head for some reason. Did your wife notice this, or did she say anything to you about this, or I guess my question would be how did this feeling of just kind of the burden of ministry, how did it affect your family? What kind of feedback did you get from your family on that, if any?
Well, my family they really didn't give me a whole lot of feedback until till I resigned. My
Really?
kids really expressed it, and even people that I love and care about in ministry that didn't maybe know that I was experiencing burnout, they've said, your passion just hasn't been, I'm glad that you're having a change. I'm glad that, and I'm just like, why didn't anybody tell me this? Why didn't you tell me you saw it? But I was working on a dissertation on burnout. So
Sure.
one of the things that surprised me, my wife and I, we actually had a company contact us about taking a secular job, and it was odd because I've never seen myself coming out of ministry per se, but my wife was like, I think it would be good for you to step out for a while, and I think that was one of the things that was
Did
the
that
eye-opening.
surprise you for her to say that?
What's that?
Did that surprise you for her to say that?
Absolutely. Yeah, because we all have that Monday morning where we're like, okay, I'm resigning. Whether you're burnt out or not, okay, I'm done with this. I'm out of here. And she's usually the voice that says, come on now, give it 48 hours. You'll be all right.
Right.
Stay in there, be a good soldier in the Lord. But she did look at me and say, I think it would be good for you to step out.
Was there any one thing at fellowship that kind of wore you down? Did you have like a season of conflict? Or I mean, I guess I'm trying to think of what precipitating factors would have led to this, I guess.
Yeah. So I think Tom Rainer's the one that talks about death by 1,000 slashes, where pastors used to burn out by that one big conflict event and the church split and he burns out because of the stress. But now my experience is it's just the one guy that comes in to complain about the music. It's the one guy that comes in and feels like our children's ministry kids are too wild. It's the guy that comes in and says, why aren't we doing Sunday school differently? And you're just being constantly challenged. And I would say COVID, brought a lot of ugliness in as well. I've said that, just in the last several months here, people are like Coke cans that are shook up and they're just waiting for somebody to pop their top. And unfortunately, as a pastor, decision-making has popped some of their tops. So you do have the disgruntledness, and I have a very open door policy, maybe to my own fault. Like I leave my door open. I want people to come in and visit with me, and maybe people have felt the freedom to share too much. And that just drain you out.
So would you say that the COVID mess has exacerbated just the junk and having to deal with just the ins and outs and ups and downs of pastoring?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No pastor's going to look at COVID and be like, man, I wish days would go back to COVID days, when we're pastoring 20 years down the road.
Just as an aside, where are you guys at as far as your attendance related to pre-COVID stuff there at fellowship?
Right now, we're probably only down about 5%. Our numbers right now are pretty well.
Awesome. Your finances have been doing well as well?
What's that?
Finances have been doing pretty good there as well?
Yeah, our finances, we're very blessed. We're debt free. We were praying about taking out the PPP loan, and we had several people that strongly did not want to take out the PPP loan. And I think from that, because we made that decision as a church not to take that out, they have felt the responsibility to give more. We're actually better off right now than we were prior to COVID.
Super.
As far
but
as goes.
All of those decisions of taking that out, that's just another grind that I know pastors have been dealing with. I wanted to ask you, And thanks for being transparent about your experiences with burnout. You did a lot of research on what the Bible says about rest. And could you just kind of give a summary of what you have learned in your research about what the Bible says about resting, what the Bible says about taking a break, what the Bible says or doesn't say about sabbaticals in ministry?
Sure. One place that I like to start is I try to define the word Sabbath or sabbatical, and I came to an understanding that really the best understanding of Sabbath and sabbatical is to stop or to cease. A lot of times we think that it's just to rest, but when you look at it from a scriptural standpoint, the idea of Sabbath or sabbatical is stopping, ceasing. So it's stopping and ceasing work. And usually as a result of the stopping and ceasing, you discover rest. And so just going back, and one of the just launching starting points for me, a lot of people like to start in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, but really we don't see a command for man to observe the Sabbath until Exodus 28 through 11 in the 10 Commandments. And one of the things that have interested me so much about the biblical standpoint of sabbatical is how many people have said, well, in that command to remember the Sabbath, we're covered under grace, so we don't have to observe the Sabbath, right? And I said, well, I had one man after a church service come and share that with me. Well, we're under grace, so we don't have to observe Sabbath. I said, what if we applied that to the other 9 that are in there? Would you agree to that we're under grace so we can murder, adultery, profane God's name? And so that begins to wrestle then with the idea of why do we take that one out? And it's the only commandment that says, remember this commandment, don't forget it. And so just that command. And why is that command there? It's for our own good. You know, it's not like God is trying to punish us. The Sabbath was meant to be a gift to us. And we even see that in Mark chapter 2, 23 through 27, that the Sabbath was given to man, the Sabbath was made for man, not for the Sabbath. And so right there, we begin to see this sabbatical rest for creation, and it's good stewardship. And again, we go back to the fact that God created us, he designed us, he knows what we need, and we need rest. We need a time of stopping and ceasing to find that rest. And so sabbatical is stopping, ceasing for an extended period of time in order to have that rest. And throughout scripture, there's the invitation to rest. 23rd Psalm, one of the most popular passages of scripture, the Lord is my shepherd. You know, the first 3 verses is really a reference to the shepherd leading the sheep to rest. And then Matthew 11:28, Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and need rest. So there's an invitation to rest. And if you move that, if you just kind of think of it coming down to more specific, sabbatical rest and invitation to rest, examples of ministerial rest would be Elijah. You know, he gets away, has the victory on Mount Carmel. He gets away, he goes into the mountain. He actually prays for his life to be taken from him, but the Lord has him rest. And it's during that rest in the end of 1 Kings chapter 19 that the Lord gives marching orders for Elijah. And it's only after he has rested for a time. I just wonder how many ministries would benefit from just that time of rest and getting away from the Lord to get the marching orders that God has. Along with examples of ministerial rest, you have Jesus after the disciples have gone out and ministered. And in Mark chapter 6, it's interesting because the disciples are called apostles, sent out ones rather than disciples. And so those sent out ones come back and they're talking about everything that they've done, how they've ministered. And Jesus tells them to come aside, to rest, because that's what was needed at that time. And so, you know, I just think about as ministers, there's that time where we go out, we minister, but just as importantly, we come back to rest. And so you come from sabbatical rest, invitation to rest, examples of ministerial rest, and then finally providing ministerial rest. And one of the things that I share with fellowship is you'll never find a scripture that says your pastor should have a sabbatical rest. However, you do find in 1 Timothy 5:17 and 18 that they're worthy of double honor. And in 1 Thessalonians 5:12 through 13, that they should be esteemed highly. And as you think about those passages of scriptures, it may be that your pastor's not in need of finances. It may be that he's not in need of being shown or told that, hey, I respect you, I love you, honoring you. It may be that your pastor, what he really needs is a season of rest. And that's the best thing that the church can do as good stewards, both for the church and for the pastor, is to let him rest.
I know as I was reading your dissertation, one of the things that's really struck me, and going back to the Genesis passage, is it says God rested on the seventh day. And I guess I never really thought about this, but God didn't need to rest. He wasn't tired. He stopped. He stopped his work, and he put a cessation to that. And so from the very beginning of creation, the whole idea of stopping work and putting it on pause, he built that in to the fabric, I think, of who we are as people. You did a survey of pastors and asked them a lot of questions about, do you take a day off? Have you had a sabbatical? Talk about that survey, if you could, for a little bit, and maybe some things you learned from that and some things that maybe surprised you.
Okay, so what I did is I sent out on my own Facebook page, and I did solicit some emails of trying to get pastors or ministers to fill out a survey that I sent out. And I'm trying to pull up the results of that here in front of me. But I was able to have 150 ministers fill out the survey. And some of the questions that I asked, one question specifically was, have you felt burnout? Or let me get there so I don't.
That's okay. And these were guys from a lot of different denominational backgrounds, if I recall. Yeah, they weren't just Southern Baptists, they were from different denominations.
That's correct. Yeah. Yes, that's correct. So one of the questions I asked, have you ever felt, I'm sorry. I can't find it here. Do you feel, or have you ever felt burned out in ministry? And 75% of the pastors said yes.
Wow.
That was surveyed in that.
Wow.
So that was 75% of them had felt that burnout or were burnt out in that.
Now, let me stop you for a second, buddy. How do you define burnout in ministry? How did you define that with the guys?
I think I used just a Webster's dictionary definition of burnout.
That's fine. Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
How many surveys did you send out if you got 150 back?
You're asking how many did I send out?
Yeah, how many did you send out? You said you had 150 respond, and 75% of that response said yes. How many did you send out?
Yeah, it's hard for me to tell because I sent them out. So basically on a Facebook page, I sent that out. And on that Facebook page, I just said, if you're a minister, would you mind to fill this out? And if you know of a minister, please ask them to fill it out. So as far as how many people received it, I have no idea.
Okay, I get you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Of those guys that responded, how many had been had a sabbatical before? You remember that? What the percentage was on that? Was it a high number? Was it a low number? I don't really recall.
What was the question there?
Of those that responded, how many of those guys had been or had experienced a ministry sabbatical before?
Yeah. Okay, so actually 24, I had 24 churches or 24 that church people that had sabbatical policies in
Okay,
their churches. It was hard for me to track those people down because some of them gave their information, some of them did not.
sure.
We did have, there were 14 that answered yes, that their church had been positively, or they had been positively affected by a sabbatical policy in their church.
Okay. Out
So
of
150.
100,
119 of them put not applicable because they hadn't had the opportunity.
okay. So it's safe to say, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, it seems like it's safe to say that the vast majority of the respondents had not been on a sabbatical and not had a sabbatical. Their churches don't have sabbatical policies. Is that pretty accurate, do you think?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So tell me about how you went about developing a sabbatical policy for your church. I know that was
Okay.
the goal of your dissertation, and you were able to do that at Fellowship. How did that work for you, and how did you go about developing that policy?
Yeah. So we did a 13 session training to get and it mainly involved our personnel committee because that's who would set up or establish such a policy in our setting. And so we used 13 training sessions that were mixed with interviews with pastors that had a negative sabbatical experience, a pastor who had a sabbatical experience, the importance of sabbatical. And then we talked about the biblical rationale and the practical rationale of a sabbatical. And then I preached 3 sermons on sabbatical, having or Sabbath or sabbatical related topics. I think the key element of the sabbatical policy was this, in just kind of a nutshell, was that even the people in the committee had no idea what pastoring is like. That was the thing that was echoed through the personnel committee, which consisted of 4 people. And when I say they consisted of 4 people, I think it's important to note that one of the committee members is a lady that walks with my wife on a daily basis, and they talk about everything together. My wife knows that she has permission to share anything she wants with this lady that was on the committee. So she's one of them. Another one of the guys is our chairman of deacons, has been here. I'm super close with him, knows everything that's happening, knowing everything that's going on in the church as much as needed there. Another one of the guys is a guy that I hunt with. And so we talk a lot. He's actually the chairman of the personnel committee, asking how things are going, those type of things. And then the 4th member there is a guy that my wife and I are real close to. They would consider us their kids or grandkids, depending on how old they want to feel that day. But so we have a really, really close relationship with them. And the thing that really surprised me is when other pastors were talking about the difficulties, the stresses, the feeling on call 24/7, the dealing with those 1,000 little slashes in our daily lives, the times where you're at your kid's ball game and you're ending up doing some kind of marriage counseling or talking about the issues of the church, or you're at Walmart. Those people on that committee had no idea what pastors experience. And I didn't even realize that was going to be a key element, is getting our church people, and those are people I'm closest to. They had no idea what we were experiencing as pastors and ministerial staff. And they'd other pastors would tell their story or their experience, and they would look and say, "But you don't deal with that, right?" And I'd have to say, "Yeah, we have that even here. It's here." And some of them were like, "Well, we've never even thought about that, those things."
Wow.
And so, I mean, that's a key element to implement a sabbatical policy.
So you brought people in, and you didn't have to tell it. You let them tell it.
Right. Because people will listen to your heartache, but they're only going to listen so much and so long.
Right.
But having somebody else come in to share that.
What would you say? So if I wanted to lead my church to develop a sabbatical policy, what would be keys, main things that I would want my church to consider? I mean, I'm going to ask you a couple of things, things to do, and then things not to do.
Yeah, I think some key things to do is make sure that you bring in an outside voice.
Okay.
I would say if you're not willing to bring out an outside voice, it's going to be very difficult. I found it very difficult and awkward for myself, even when they looked at me and said, well, does that happen here? Are you experiencing those kind of things? I found those things difficult. I think that one of the things that you have to do is clearly communicate the biblical rationale for that sabbatical policy, and make sure that you're in establishing a sabbatical policy for your church, that you're not telling everybody else that their job is less important or not significant.
Talk about unpack that thought for a second, if you would, please.
Okay. Well, I mean, there's people in the medical field right now during COVID. I mean, they're working maybe harder than pastors are. Their mental, spiritual fatigue is at all-time high. I also do some chaplain work at the hospital, so I know that if you have a nurse in your church and you're talking about a sabbatical policy, she's probably feeling the strain and stuff of that. So you're communicating. I'm not saying that I'm the only one here that should have a sabbatical policy, but I'm the only one that can work in this realm for that sabbatical policy. And so making sure that you're sensitive to the emotional, physical, spiritual needs of the people that you're talking to.
Okay, respond to this statement. A sabbatical is just a long paid vacation.
Yeah. And to some, I don't know that you'll ever convince some people's minds on that. The way that we overcame that obstacle, and there were some that felt that way, but the way that we overcame that obstacle is we began to talk about specifics of what would be happening on that sabbatical. And so when they began to realize I'm not going to be sitting at my house just catching up, binging on the Netflix series or whatever, but there was going to be an intentionality of me getting away from everybody and spending time in the Word, trying to reconnect with the Lord, reconnecting with vision of what I would want or what God would have me to do the second half of my life in ministry. When we began to talk about this is still work, but it's a break, it's a stopping of ceasing of pastoring, but I'm still going to be working on figuring out what God wants, reconnecting with the Lord in my relationship with Him. Another aspect of it for me is, and I shared with our committee, that if I was to have a sabbatical, one of the things I would really like to do in a bucket list is to explore the Holy Lands. And so to go to Israel, Jerusalem, to see those things. And so when they began to understand that it was with intentionality, that there was going to be something to be working on to further my relationship with the Lord or further my understanding of a subject or a topic, they were more open to that.
So the difference between a vacation and sabbatical, how would you define that or describe that?
Yeah. Vacation for me for the last 16 years has been to spend time with my family, to build that relationship and that dynamic, to get away from everything else, focus on them, and to stop and break that work. And so, and I shared that a lot of times I come back from vacation with my kids being teenagers. I've come back from my vacation and thankful that I get to go to work so I can get some rest, because they wear me out, running me all over the place. But the idea there of sabbatical is it has an intentionality either for growth for yourself or knowledge or relationship, fellowship with the Lord.
I think, as I read your dissertation, the concept that struck me was what you just said, the intentionality behind it. You're not just getting away. You've built into the plan for sabbatical, here's what I'm going to do, and this is why I'm going to do it, and this is how it's going to benefit me and the ministry and the church that I'm at. And you also included into it, when I get back, I'm going to report to whoever, personnel committee, deacons, to the church. This is what I did, and this is how the Lord spoke to me, and this is how the Lord worked. You don't do that with a vacation, for sure.
Right. That's
Yeah.
good.
So what are some things not to do on, if maybe this, I don't know how to exactly put the question. What are some things you want to avoid, I guess, when it comes to sabbaticals? I know you talked about building into the process an agreement that the person who goes on sabbatical is going to stick around for at least a year. I know of one church that the pastor went on sabbatical, and he got back. He was totally burned out, just in ministry, and he went on sabbatical for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, and got back, and he was still burned out. And I don't know that he stayed another year. You mentioned that in your writing, and I don't know if there are other things that kind of red flags that a church ought to, or that a pastor who's thinking about trying to help lead his church develop this kind of a policy, what not to do. Can you think of some things?
Yeah, one of the things to just encourage in our own mindset for a pastor that's trying to lead a church and leading a sabbatical policy, that you deserve this. Recognize that it's a gracious act on behalf of your church if they were to adopt a policy for you, and to be grateful and thankful, and not that you deserve this, or that even that you should be the recipient of be demanding to be the recipient of a sabbatical. That would, just a humility with even the idea that your church would consider a sabbatical policy. I guess, you're wanting to communicate with people about the sabbatical policy. So one of the things is, I wouldn't just spring it on your church, as far as, think through this, talk with some of your key leaders, talk with your deacons about it, and way in advance. Don't just like, next summer, I would like to have a sabbatical policy, and we need to work on that. But being able to prepare for that in advance, I guess what I'm trying to say is if you're wanting, or you're thinking about sabbatical in year 7, you probably need to be thinking about that in year 3 or 4 of talking to your leadership about that.
Was that hard for you to get that conversation rolling at fellowship? I mean, you had a good relationship with your folks, but I can imagine it being uncomfortable, I guess, to get that ball rolling.
Yeah, and I was kind of blessed in the idea that I was able to say, this is a dissertation project. I'm going to be talking about burnout and how sabbatical is an answer to that. And then, of course, the next result was, well, are you going on a sabbatical? And what I learned is a lot of people are really misinformed about what sabbatical is. I've had several people that thought, well, I thought a sabbatical was a mandatory year away. And that's not, of course, in the policy that we ended up implementing. It wasn't a year. In fact, in church our size, if we were to implement a year-long sabbatical, I think our people would have moved on at that point.
Yeah, I think so. When I hear sabbatical, I think academic sabbatical, where they take a year off and they, go to Europe or someplace and write a book or write articles or that kind of a thing. I think that's the first thing that comes to my mind anyway when I hear that word.
And I think a lot of our people did too.
Let me ask, I got Dave Bowden here, and Pat Smolin is the worship pastor at First Baptist Church, Kimberling City. Do you guys have any questions or any comments about anything that that Buddy's talked about, either regarding burnout or just sabbaticals in general? Just want to see where you guys are at on that. Pat, Dave?
I've got something. I was going to give Pat the green light first.
Yeah, hey, I appreciate it.
Pat, by the way, is the newbie. He's the new guy down at Kimberling City. It's a great church, and I didn't have a chance to meet you personally yet in these COVID days. It's good to see your face, and just wanted to kind of bring you in. Any thoughts, any questions, comments for Buddy regarding anything he's talked about, or anything kind of related to that universe?
Yeah, and Buddy, I appreciate the work that you did. I'm sorry I haven't caught the whole thing. Two things. I was wondering if the policy might be available for us to look at that you were just showing. But I know second thing is for me, I was at a church in Nebraska for 7.5 years, church in Oklahoma for 6 years, and I know I could have used a break. Now I did do my doctoral work during that time as well. So we joked about my having a beach ministry when I would have to go to down to Florida for a week for my cohort. But I know that I could have used time away, and it would have helped. So and you were addressing this a little bit. What would be the best way to approach the church on behalf of the entire staff to talk about this issue?
Yeah. I think that goes back to having a good open relationship with your personnel committee, however that looks. For others, it's going to be a deacon body. Those that are close to you, and just talking about the fact that you don't feel as sharp as you once felt, that you don't have the burning passion, that it is becoming harder, and just allowing them to know that, hey, we do have an issue here. I do feel like I'm not as sharp as I once was. I don't have the time to just dream and envision like I once did. And just talking with your key leaders about that and letting them kind of discuss it, because they'll discuss it. Everybody knows that in Baptist life, there's the meeting, and then there's the meeting after the meeting that everybody has. And so just sharing with them those things. I think if you have a church that, is a loving church and recognizes you, and they see you serving and working, I would say that most of the church here would say that I have a strong work ethic. And so they understand and they see me ministering. And so just communicating with them that I am sensing burnout, that I am tired, and them kind of saying, well, what are some solutions to that? And then just talking about the idea of sabbatical in the future.
Right. And one of the things that, I would be very willing to sit down with church leadership, spend a couple hours if they'd be open to that, and just talk about it in general, particularly in the light of COVID, that has just been a grind for so many guys. I'm speaking with last week with a very well-known and respected Baptist leader here in Missouri, and he shared that because of burnout that he can see coming related to the COVID crisis, that we may be losing some good guys in the next years because of that. And which is one of the reasons why I appreciate Buddy being willing to sit down and talk about these things, because I think it's a conversation that needs to be started in our churches. And so I would be very willing to sit down with church leadership after having spoken with the senior pastor and making sure that, we're on the same page, and sharing with them, look, here's some things that are going on. right now. So, yeah.
Well, that brings me to the question that I had. Is I'm assuming that Fellowship Baptist is a member of the local association over there, and if so, what role did that association play in this situation?
Yeah, so we are in Shoal Creek Association. We were in the middle of just now getting a new director of missions, which is Alan Brock. And so it was hard to bring Alan in on a whole lot. I would love to have brought Alan in because he actually pastored here for several years. And so he could talk about the need for that from his perspective as a prior pastor, but just the opportunity really didn't lend to that.
Sure.
But I would say, so the association in a Spring River Association in Joplin, I was able to talk and share with their pastors. Kirk Baker is the director of missions there. And I think Kirk is probably going to be doing some work with the churches and trying to make some small suggestions to church leaders about the idea and concept of sabbatical policies.
All right. Can I ask a follow-up to that then? Do you perceive any possibility that a local church might view that from the association as getting involved in the local church business?
I guess my answer would be to that is if your association has a really clear-cut mission or purpose statement, one of the purposes or missions of that association is either going to be strengthening churches or strengthening ministers in the churches, healthy churches, something to that degree. And I would say that if that's the mission of the association, then probably the association would have a voice to speak in on pastors' health.
Okay, the reason I'm asking that is based on what you're saying. You're giving a lot of reasons about communicating to avoid misunderstandings and potential pushback between the pastor who wants to implement this policy and the key leaders in the church, but we really hadn't talked about now if you bring in somebody like the association into the mix, could you perceive that causing any kind of friction? And I'm not hearing you say that. It just doesn't sound like your particular association either had the funds or maybe had the background to, or whatever the opportunity was, they just didn't get involved to that degree. So I'm trying to figure out where we're going to go with this when it's time for Tri-County's efforts.
Yeah. So our church was really open, especially that personnel committee. What I did, Dr. Shuford was one of them that came in and spoke as a dissertation chair and to talk about the responsibilities of a pastor and how this project was bigger than fellowship. Our people were very open and receptive to him. Chad Pendergraph came and spoke as a pastor that had been on a sabbatical and talked about the benefits of that. And we also had Mike Haynes come from Greene County Baptist Association, and Mike, because he does deal with so many pastors, and Dr. Shuford dealing with so many pastors, they were able to talk about the role of a pastor without a pastor having to share too much. And our people seemed very open to it. I guess if you churches in a culture of that, then it might be difficult.
Well, I know Philip, I don't think you were in the room when the committee was discussing this, and I wasn't involved in the discussion because I was there as an observer for that meeting.
Buddy, by the way, what Dave's getting ready to refer to is Tri-County is, at our next executive board meeting, is going to propose a sabbatical policy for the director of missions. And so when that was brought up at our administrative team, I left the room and just let them talk. So that's what Dave's talking about now.
Okay.
Yep. A couple of the members of the board, that I think they were trying to be fair and try to envision both positives and potential problems. And a couple of them expressed concern that maybe some of the more hard-headed Baptists, might be start giving some pushback on that idea. So I don't know. I haven't experienced that, and this is all new to me. And I was just kind of curious about if you had maybe already encountered that. It was interesting to hear those potential observations of. How did you cover your absence? How did the church cover your absence?
We were, and I haven't been on a sabbatical, but the idea was that we would have an intentional pastor or interim, and that way because one of our training sessions was actually a training on a minister who had had a negative experience with sabbatical, and he was a staff member who, unfortunately, everything was dumped on him when the pastor went on sabbatical. And so our committee was able to look at that and say, okay, in that case, the church will hire an intentional preacher, intentional pastor, a retired pastor or transitional pastor that could come in and do that.
And he would fill the pulpit essentially in that time.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. And how long was that absence?
It's basically a month is what for the first 7 to 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah. See if I can pull this up. So what fellowship came up with is a schedule depending on how long you served and what a recommended time for a sabbatical would be. You see that on the screen, Dave? Oh, that's right. You're on the phone, but I've got it on the screen.
I'm on the phone.
Okay, yeah, that's right. I've got a copy of their policy that I could, email you guys or
Okay.
somewhere. Yeah, we could do that. That's no problem. Yep.
One thing that I would also stress when you're implementing that sabbatical policy or you're talking about the sabbatical policy, sure, there's going to be that your motive is so that you can go on a sabbatical policy. One thing that I would continue to stress is that it's not just for you to have a sabbatical policy, but for future pastors, setting the stone for future pastors, because you may have a sabbatical policy and never take a sabbatical, but at least it's there for the next pastor. And I would say, I really didn't feel like I would even, if you would have tried to give me a sabbatical at year 10 or 11 here at Fellowship, I probably wouldn't even be interested in that. I mean, things were going and blowing, man. Why would we, why would we do that? Why would I take a month to take off? But then within the last 3 years, I think that had there been a month of time, I would have been a healthier pastor for sure.
And so here's what I understand the dynamic going on at Fellowship now. So you led the church to implement a sabbatical policy, and almost immediately upon leading the church to do that, you resigned, and you're going to go work with Samaritan's Purse. But here's the upside for the church is they've now got an approved sabbatical policy in the books. So when they're talking to the next guy, that's a definite plus for the church to say, look, we've thought this through, and we've worked through all the details, and this is something that we've got for our pastors. If I'm an incoming guy, that tells me a lot about the church, and that's very positive, I would think. So you never got your sabbatical?
Okay. No.
You're moving to Haiti.
I guess I'm taking a couple of years sabbatical from pastoring.
So what kind of sabbatical policy does Samaritan's Purse have?
I think every 16 to 18 weeks, because of the condition, you get 5 days
Oh,
but
is that right?
stateside.
Okay. All right.
And
Hey,
can I ask one more question? How
Yeah, go-
big was that
go
church
ahead.
that you're coming from?
We run on a typical Sunday, 185 to 220.
Okay. Thanks.
but I sure appreciate your time. Appreciate you taking time to unpack what ministry burnout is, what it's been for you. I don't know how many guys are going to be watching this video, but just my experience talking to guys and my own personal experience in ministry, it's a real thing. And thanks for being transparent about that. And thank you for taking the bull by the horns and not just talking about and thinking about burnout, but doing something proactive in your church that's going to be a benefit to pastors in the future. And I'm convinced that your work with your dissertation and hopefully with this interview will be a blessing to a lot of pastors and their families and churches in the future. So on my behalf, on behalf of Tri-County Baptist Association, we wish you and your family well in your next endeavor. On what day? What day are you leaving to go to Haiti?
February 8th.
February 8th. And are you leaving the family here, or what's happening?
So February the 8th, my wife and I will go to training at North Carolina. And then on the 17th, I actually fly out to Haiti, and my wife will come back and finish out the semester teaching.
Okay. And so she'll join you, what, May?
May or June, yeah.
You guys living in a compound in Port-au-Prince, or what's?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're within 5 minutes of the airport in case we need to get out there.
You got all your shots?
I'm actually, this afternoon, I got to go for a second round in Kansas City.
What kind of shots you got to get?
Typhoid, hepatitis, just those. What's that?
Is COVID one of those?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay.
Oh,
Well, brother, we appreciate your time, and it's been a blessing to talk with you.